In this video, I'm going to talk about whether God is limited or not. Making a new layer here. Okay. So is God limited? Are there things that even God can't do? Now, I'm not going to do that old stupid question, if God is all powerful, can he create a rock that even he can't lift? I'm not going to ask that question. I'm going to demonstrate absolutely using deductive reasoning that God, depending on how you define him, has to be, there's no other option, has to be limited. And I'm going to do that really quick, but these are some of the questions I have. I'm going to I'll open up a new document really quick. Okay. This is just easy to do this. Okay, so the first, we need premises, right, that we agree on in order to come to conclusions. That is, in order to come to deductive truths, which are absolute as far as they're absolute as far as deductiveness is concerned. So, first premise is God is eternal. And I already went through before why, if God's not eternal, then there's no reason to worship this thing, because it's a finite thing, and one day what it is now we will be if we live long enough, and therefore there's no reason to worship anyway. God is eternal. God is infinite, and he doesn't have to be infinite in spatial infinite, like he can have a finite size, but that gets another problem actually. Maybe he can't, because if he has infinite information, he has to have infinite size. For how can he store infinite information in a finite size? But anyway, he has to be infinite in some way, right? Infinite in his knowledge or understanding, because he's eternal. And since he's eternal, anyway, this is another video, I went through this, but most people accept these premises, and I can show why they must be, if it's to be God. So God is eternal, God is infinite. But really, the only premise I need is God is eternal to make my point. And what is eternal? Eternal means, and again, this is where it's important, this has to be said, but eternal means without beginning and without ending, or without an end. That's what eternal means. So that's dictionary definition. We have to go by what words mean. And can I draw an absolute deductive conclusion based upon these premises, that God is eternal, and then define eternal, in case those that don't know what it means according to the dictionary, without beginning, without ending? Now I can say for certain then, according to this definition of eternal, that there's something that God can't do. God cannot or can't cease to exist. He can't make himself disappear and stop existing. That's impossible. Because if God could make himself cease to exist, just poof out of existence, then he was never eternal to begin with, because eternal by definition, without beginning, without ending. If he made himself have an ending, or if he could make himself have an ending, then he's no longer eternal to begin with, for eternal cannot have an ending. So if eternal cannot have an ending, and God's eternal, he cannot make himself to cease to exist. Now, easy way around this problem, just redefine what God is. Use a different word. Instead of saying eternal, say God is immortal, which means he has no, let's say immortal in this sense means he has no beginning, but he could have an ending. But, he can also live forever. Like, Zeus is immortal. Zeus has the potential to live forever, but he could be destroyed. Vampires have the potential to live forever. In some legends, vampires have the potential to live forever, but they could be destroyed. Actually, vampires don't have the potential to live forever according to modern science, because eventually the universe will go cold and they'll die, but whatever. Actually, maybe cold won't kill them, only fire, so only if the universe collapses. Anyway, you get the point. So you just redefine it. Well, now we have another problem. And this problem would be this. Whatever you say God is, let's say, we'll make up a word. God is blood. And blood means to have no beginning. Oops. Okay, so let's say that's what blood means. Blood means have no beginning. Now there's something God cannot do. If God is blood, which means he has no beginning, then God can't have chosen, or God couldn't have chosen to come into existence. See, so no matter what you define God as, there's something God could not have done. That is, God could not have chosen to come into existence, because he didn't exist to choose to come into existence. And, he's always existed. So since he's always existed, he couldn't have chosen to come into existence, right? He couldn't have made himself come into existence, since he has always existed. That's something he could not have done. So anyway, again, most people believe that God cannot be destroyed. And if you believe God can be destroyed, why worship it? Why worship something that can be destroyed or that can kill itself? But again, the easy way around the first one is just to say he's not eternal. Just say, well, God is this, which means he has the potential to live forever, but he could cease to exist if he wanted to, which means everything would cease to exist, right? Unless you don't believe he sustains everything, that he can create something, then make himself cease to exist, and then we would still exist. Then the question would be, how do we know for sure that God is still existing? It's possible God doesn't exist anymore, that God killed himself. And so that's the problem with that. If you run with that definition and you say, yeah, it's possible for God to kill himself, and that is God, God is God. The universe is not contingent upon God. It can exist without God. He creates it like we create a watch, and the watch will tick without us. Wind up watch, whatever. And so God too can create the universe and then leave, and it will still continue working. And if that's the case, then he doesn't exist. So anyway, you see some of the problems there. What you'd have to do to rectify that would say is that God could cease to exist if he wished to, but if he did, everything would cease to exist. Therefore, we know for sure that he still exists. Something like that. That is, the universe is contingent upon God. Its existence is contingent upon God. But again, you're not going to say God had a beginning. If you say God had a beginning, well, that's ridiculous. If you say God had a beginning, then there's no reason to worship it, because we if we live long enough, would one day be what it is. So that's the problem with saying God had a beginning. But if you say that God had no beginning, then how can you say that he could have an ending? Because now we're dealing with outside of time. Anyway, so you run into all these kinds of problems. So there are clearly things God cannot do, for God is limited to his nature, and so God cannot cease to exist. God could not have chosen to exist, and there's other things that God cannot do, and all you have to do is just define his attributes. Once you start defining its attributes, and we're talking about nothingness here because my other video about nothingness, but that's fine. I like talking about nothingness. These are just abstract ideas we're talking about, what if type things. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and cut this video short because I think I've said everything I wanted to say as far as this topic, and I'll move on with the next one, which deals with different topics of evil and good. Okay.